The lights of the AGT stage were brighter than anything he had ever known. They washed over him in waves, white, gold, and blue, so intense they blurred the edges of the world. For a moment he forgot where he was. The audience became a distant hum, like the ocean heard from behind closed eyes. Thousands of faces, millions more watching from living rooms across America. And yet, standing alone at center stage, he had never felt more exposed or more invisible. He adjusted the microphone with careful hands, hands that had worked long hours, hands that had lifted boxes, wiped tables, held trembling fingers in hospital rooms, hands that had learned to sing not in studios but in silence. A polite ripple of applause greeted him, not excitement, not disbelief, just courtesy. He swallowed. From the judge's table, Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair. His expression was familiar to anyone who had ever watched the show, half curiosity, half doubt. And then it appeared, the smirk, not cruel, not unkind, just practiced, the look of a man who had seen tens of thousands of dreamers walk onto this stage believing they were different. The audience noticed it immediately. So did the singer. He didn't take it personally. In fact, he understood it. If he was sitting there, watching a man in a plain jacket with nervous eyes and no flashy introduction, he might smirk too. The host asked for his name. He said it softly, almost apologetically, and where are you from? He named a small town most people wouldn't recognize, a place without spotlights, without second chances, a place where people learned early that dreams were a luxury, not a plan. Simon tilted his head. So, he said, pen resting between his fingers, tell us why you're here. The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. This was the moment when most contestants launched into dramatic stories, tragedy, triumph, or tears on cue. The audience leaned in, ready to be told how to feel, but the singer hesitated. He looked out at the crowd again, then down at the stage beneath his feet. For a second it seemed like he might forget what he came to say. His chest rose and fell, then he smiled, not confidently but gently. I'm here, he began, because singing is the only way I know how to give something back. The room grew quieter. He explained that he wasn't a professional. He didn't grow up with lessons or mentors. Music came to him late at night after work when the house was finally still. He sang to empty rooms, to tired walls, to people who didn't always have the strength to speak. I sing for my mom, he said, his voice steady but soft, when she's scared, when the hospital gets quiet, when words don't work anymore. A few audience members shifted in their seats. I sing at shelters sometimes, he continued, not because I'm good, but because people listen differently when you sing. For a few minutes they don't feel forgotten. The smirk at the judge's table faltered, just slightly. The singer wasn't performing yet, but something was already happening. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't dramatize his life. He spoke the way someone does when they're used to being unheard. Carefully, simply, without expectation. I don't expect to win, he said. I just wanted to stand here once, to show my family that kindness can travel far, even if it starts small. Silence settled over the theater. Simon leaned forward now, elbows on the table. The smirk was gone, replaced by something harder to define, attention, real attention. The singer felt it, but he didn't let it change him. He had learned long ago not to chase approval. Approval was unpredictable. Kindness wasn't. The host nodded gently and stepped aside. Whenever you're ready, he said. The singer took a breath. He closed his eyes for just a second, not in fear, but in memory. He pictured his mother's smile when pain loosened its grip. The way strangers' shoulders relaxed when a song wrapped around them like a blanket. The countless times he had sung with no audience at all. When he opened his eyes, he looked directly toward the judge's table. Simon met his gaze. For the first time since the singer had walked on stage, there was no judgment there, only curiosity, only a quiet question, what if I'm wrong about this one? The singer placed both hands around the microphone. This wasn't a man chasing fame. This was someone carrying something fragile, something human, something he hoped, just hoped, might survive the lights. The music had not started yet, but the stage had already changed. And somewhere between a smirk and a moment of silence, the audience felt it too. Something unexpected was about to happen. Before the first note could be sung, the singer did something unexpected. He didn't signal the band. He didn't nod to the music director. Instead, he lifted his hand slightly, as if asking for permission, not from the judges, but from the room itself. "Can I say something?" he asked. The audience murmured. Simon glanced sideways, then back again, giving a small nod. He had heard countless pre-song speeches before, some powerful, some rehearsed, some painfully long. This felt different. There was no performance in the request, just honesty. The singer stepped closer to the microphone. "I know this is a talent show," he said quietly, "and I know you're here to hear a song. But before I sing, I want you to know where this voice comes from." He paused, gathering himself. "It doesn't come from confidence," he said. "It comes from necessity." A ripple of stillness moved through the theater. Even the cameras seemed to slow, as if sensing the shift. He spoke of mornings that began before sunrise, when the world was still asleep, and the weight of responsibility already pressed heavy on his chest, of jobs that didn't come with applause or recognition, just sore muscles and quiet endurance. He never named the work, but everyone could picture it. The kind of work millions do every day without anyone noticing. "I used to think singing was selfish," he admitted, "like it was something extra. Something I didn't deserve when there were bills to pay and people counting on me." So he kept it hidden. He sang in hallways while cleaning, in his car, parked outside hospitals, in kitchens late at night when the house finally fell quiet. Singing wasn't a dream. It was a release, a way to survive days that offered little room for hope. The audience leaned in. Then he spoke about his mother. "She's the strongest person I know," he said, and his voice wavered for the first time. "She raised us to believe that if you have something good inside you, you don't keep it, you share it." He told them how illness had slowly stolen her strength, but never her kindness. How even from a hospital bed, she worried more about others than herself. How she asked him to sing, not because it cured her pain, but because it reminded her of who she was before fear took over. "When I sing for her," he said, "she smiles, and for a moment, the machines disappear." Somewhere in the audience, someone quietly sobbed. The singer shifted his weight, steadying himself. He explained how word spread. How a nurse once asked him to sing a little louder. How another patient listened from behind a curtain. How soon, people he had never met were asking him to stay just 5 more minutes. "I realized something," he said. "Music doesn't fix things, but it gives people a place to rest." He began volunteering at shelters, not as a performer, but as a presence. No stage, no lights, just folding chairs and tired faces. He sang songs people remembered from better days. Songs that reminded them they were more than their worst moment. "I saw grown men cry," he said softly, not because the song was sad, but because someone finally saw them. At the judges' table, Simon's expression had changed completely. His usual armor, sarcasm, sharp critique, distance, had fallen away. He wasn't judging now, he was listening. "So why AGT?" the host asked gently. The singer smiled, small and unsure. "Because kindness deserves a microphone too," he said. A hush fell over the room. "I don't have money to give," he continued. "I don't have influence, but I have a voice, and every time I've used it for someone else, it's come back stronger." He looked out at the audience again, eyes glistening but steady. "I'm not here to prove I'm the best," he said. "I'm here to prove that what we carry through hard times can become a gift." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Simon cleared his throat. "You know," he said slowly, "most people come on this stage wanting to be seen." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You came here wanting to give something." The audience erupted into applause, not loud, not wild, but deep and sustained, the kind that comes from recognition rather than excitement. The singer bowed his head slightly, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he whispered. Simon leaned back, no smirk now, only respect. "Well," he said, tapping his pen once, "let's hear the song." As the music director prepared the track, the singer took one final breath. This was no longer just a performance. This was a continuation of a life spent offering comfort in small, unnoticed ways. And now, the entire world was about to listen. The theater seemed to inhale as one. The music director gave a quiet signal, and the opening chord floated into the air, soft, restrained, almost hesitant. It wasn't a dramatic entrance, no thunderous drums, no sweeping strings, just a simple melody, bare enough to leave room for truth. The singer tightened his grip on the microphone. This was the moment he had prepared for in silence, in parked cars and empty rooms, in hospital hallways where echoes carried farther than hope. Yet standing there now, under the lights, he felt the weight of every eye in the room. Not judgment, attention, and that somehow felt heavier. He opened his mouth. The first note emerged unguarded and raw. It wasn't loud. It didn't reach for perfection, but it was steady, and it carried something else with it. A history, 1,000 quiet nights pressed into a single breath. A ripple moved through the audience. People didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They leaned forward instinctively, as if afraid that moving too quickly might break something fragile. The singer's voice trembled at the edges, not from fear, but from emotion held too long. Each lyric landed gently, like a hand resting on a shoulder. The words spoke of struggle, not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet admissions. Of mornings that felt heavy, of dreams postponed, not abandoned, of choosing love when resentment would have been easier. In the front row, a woman pressed her fingers to her lips. She hadn't planned on crying tonight. She had come for entertainment, for distraction. But something in that voice reached past her expectations and touched a place she didn't usually visit. On the judges' panel, Simon Cowell froze. His pen stopped tapping. His posture shifted forward, elbows now resting on the table. He had heard incredible voices, technically flawless, effortlessly impressive. This wasn't that. This was something else. The singer moved into the chorus, and the room seemed to shrink around him. It no longer felt like a massive theater. It felt intimate, personal, like a confession offered to strangers who suddenly felt like old friends. He sang of kindness as a choice, of staying gentle in a world that rewards hardness, of holding on, not for applause, but for the people who needed him to. The second verse deepened. His voice cracked slightly on a line about letting go of anger. He didn't hide it. He didn't pull back. He leaned into it, allowing the imperfection to breathe. That crack did something no perfect note ever could. It made the song human. A man in the balcony wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. He had lost his job months earlier, and hadn't told anyone how heavy it felt to wake up each day pretending to be fine. The lyrics weren't about him, but they felt written for him. Backstage, a crew member paused mid-step, headset forgotten. She had heard hundreds of auditions through these walls. This one stopped her cold. The singer closed his eyes as he reached the bridge. His shoulders rose and fell as if each breath carried memory. The lights softened, bathing the stage in a warm glow. He wasn't performing to the cameras anymore. He was singing to someone only he could see, maybe his mother, maybe every stranger who had ever listened in silence, maybe the version of himself that once believed his voice didn't matter. The music swelled just slightly, enough to lift him, not overpower him. His voice grew stronger, not louder, stronger. Confidence wasn't replacing humility. It was standing beside it. Simon glanced at the other judges. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. They were witnessing the same thing, a transformation not of skill, but of presence. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was about connection. As the final chorus approached, the singer opened his eyes and looked out into the crowd. His gaze wasn't searching for approval. It was offering something: comfort, understanding, solidarity. The words rang out clearer now. You are not alone. You are not invisible. You matter. The audience felt it, not as lyrics, but as a truth. A young woman in the crowd reached for her partner's hand. An older man nodded slowly, as if agreeing with something he'd been afraid to admit. A teenager felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother wiping them away. The singer held the final note longer than expected. It wavered, not in pitch but in feeling, before settling gently into silence. For half a second no one moved, The song ended, but its echo stayed. Then, somewhere in the back, someone stood, then another and another. Within moments, the entire theater rose to its feet. The applause wasn't explosive at first. It was deep, sustained, grateful. Simon stood too, slowly, deliberately. Not as a judge making a statement, but as a human acknowledging another. The singer lowered his head, overwhelmed. His chest tightened. He hadn't come for this. He hadn't expected it. He had only hoped that the song would land somewhere soft. It had landed everywhere. As the applause continued, the singer looked up again, eyes shining. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel it. Not pride, not victory, but relief. His voice had carried what his heart had held for so long. And the world had listened. The applause didn't fade the way applause usually does. It didn't rise and crash like a wave before disappearing into polite silence. Instead, it lingered, heavy, warm, almost protective. The kind of applause that says we felt that, not you impressed us. The singer stood frozen at center stage. His hands still held the microphone, but he barely felt its weight. His chest rose unevenly as he tried to steady his breathing. For a moment he looked like someone who had just survived a storm and was still unsure whether it was truly over. The lights softened as if the stage itself was giving him space to breathe. He glanced toward the judges' table, uncertain of what came next. Simon Cowell remained standing. That alone sent a ripple through the crowd. Simon was known for his honesty, for his sharp words and unfiltered critiques. He didn't stand easily. He didn't do it for sentiment. When Simon stood, it meant something had shifted. Slowly, deliberately, Simon placed his pen on the table. The room quieted. The other judges sat, watching him, not with anticipation, but with respect. They had felt it too. Whatever had just happened on that stage was bigger than a song. Simon exhaled, as if choosing not just words, but truth. "I've heard thousands of singers," he began, his voice calm, unguarded. "And most of them come here trying to show us how good they are." He paused, eyes still on the singer. "You didn't do that. The audience held its breath. You came out here and reminded us why music exists in the first place." A murmur of agreement spread through the theater. The singer swallowed hard. His eyes brimmed, but he didn't look away. Simon leaned forward slightly. "There were moments in that song where your voice cracked," he said. "Technically speaking, some people might call that a flaw." He stopped, letting the words hang just long enough to sting. "But those moments," Simon continued, "were the reason none of us could look away." The crowd erupted again, louder now, surer. The singer shook his head slightly, overwhelmed. He had spent years apologizing for his voice. For not being polished enough, for not being loud enough, for not being enough. And now, the very things he once tried to hide were being named as his strength. Simon's expression softened further. "You sang like someone who wasn't asking for permission," he said. "You sang like someone who had something to give." Simon paused, then added quietly, "And that's rare." One of the judges wiped her eyes and spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been on this show a long time," she said, "and sometimes we forget that behind every audition is a life." She turned toward the singer. "You didn't just bring your voice. You brought your heart, and you gave it away without asking for anything back." The audience applauded again, some people already standing. Another judge leaned forward. "I want to say something," he said. "You walked out here looking nervous, almost apologetic, like you weren't sure you belonged." He smiled gently. "Let me be clear, you belong here." The singer's composure finally broke. Tears slipped free, unashamed. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He pressed his lips together and nodded instead, one hand covering his face for a brief moment. The host stepped closer, offering him a tissue. The simple gesture felt symbolic. Kindness returning kindness. When the room settled again, Simon spoke one more time. "There's a lot of noise in the world right now," he said, "a lot of people trying to be heard." He gestured toward the singer. "You didn't shout, you didn't beg, you just stood there and told the truth." Simon looked out at the audience, then back again, and somehow that was louder than anything else tonight. The singer took a breath and finally spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking but clear. I didn't come here thinking anyone would remember me." He looked out at the crowd now, really seeing them, but if even one person felt less alone because of that song, then it was worth it. The audience rose once more, this time without hesitation. The standing ovation returned, fuller, deeper. Simon nodded slowly. "I think," he said, "a lot more than one person did." The host smiled. "Well," he said gently, "it's time for the votes." The judges cast them one by one. Yes, yes, yes. Each one landed like a heartbeat when the final verdict came. 4 unanimous approvals. The crowd erupted into cheers that shook the room, but the most powerful moment didn't come from the votes. It came when the singer stepped back, overwhelmed, and pressed a hand to his chest, not in triumph, but in gratitude. This stage, once terrifying, now felt like a bridge, a place where kindness had crossed from one life into many. As confetti cannons prepared silently above, and the cameras captured every tear, one truth settled deeply into the room. This wasn't just a breakthrough for a singer. It was a reminder, for the judges, for the audience, for everyone watching, that compassion still has the power to stop us in our tracks. And once it does, nothing feels the same again. The lights slowly dimmed as the applause began to soften, but something remained in the air, something heavier than sound, gentler than silence. The singer stood just off, center now, no longer alone under the spotlight, yet not ready to step away from it either. His journey on the stage had ended, but its meaning was only beginning to unfold. Backstage, crew members paused to offer quiet smiles. A camera operator gave a small nod of respect. A stagehand whispered, "That was beautiful," as he passed. These weren't part of the show. They were human responses, unrehearsed, sincere. The singer breathed it in, still unsure how a few minutes of honesty had rippled so far. Out in the audience, people returned to their seats slowly, as if standing had been a promise they weren't ready to break. Conversations were hushed, thoughtful. Strangers exchanged glances that said, "Did you feel that too?" For many, the song had opened something they didn't realize was still closed. Simon Cowell remained at the judges' table for a moment longer than usual. He watched the singer step away from the center of the stage, and for the briefest instant, he didn't see a contestant. He saw a reminder of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place, not for perfection. Not for fame, but for connection. When Simon finally spoke again, it wasn't for the cameras. "You know," he said quietly, almost to himself, "this is why we do this." The host nodded. "Yes," he replied. Moments like this, as the show moved on, something unseen continued to travel outward, through screens, through homes, through hearts. In a small apartment somewhere in the Midwest, a nurse sat on her couch, still in uniform, exhaustion heavy on her shoulders. She had turned on the TV for background noise, expecting nothing, but now she sat motionless, tears slipping down her face. She thought of the patients she had comforted, the songs she had hummed under her breath, the kindness she gave without ever being noticed. The singer's voice had spoken her language. In another home, a father and son sat side by side. They hadn't spoken much in years. The father cleared his throat, then quietly said, "That was something, huh?" The son nodded. For the first time in a long while, neither changed the channel. Online, comments began to pour in. Not the usual jokes or rankings, but confessions. "I needed this tonight. This reminded me to be kinder." I forgot how powerful a simple song could be. The singer would read those comments later, alone, in a quiet room. He would read them slowly, carefully, as if afraid they might disappear if he rushed. Each one felt like a hand reaching back to him, returning what he had given. That night he called his mother. She answered weakly but smiling. "I saw it," she said. "You didn't just sing." He closed his eyes. "What did I do?" he asked softly. "You reminded people who they are," she replied. He sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, tears finally free to fall. For years he had wondered if his voice mattered. Now he understood. It had never been about volume or reach. It had always been about intention. Days later, invitations came, interviews, requests, opportunities he had never imagined. But what stayed with him most weren't the offers, it was the messages. A teacher who played the song for her class and watched her students grow quiet. A veteran who said the lyrics helped him sleep for the first time in weeks. A stranger who wrote simply, "I chose kindness today because of you." The singer kept singing, not just on stages, but in shelters, in hospitals, in rooms where no cameras waited. Fame hadn't changed his purpose, it had amplified it, and every time he stepped up to a microphone, he remembered the smirk that had once greeted him. Not with resentment, but gratitude, because doubt had made the moment real. Skepticism had made belief powerful. Back on the AGT stage, long after the season ended, the memory remained. Contestants would walk out nervous and hopeful, and Simon would watch them with a little more patience than before. Because once a quiet singer had walked onto that stage and reminded everyone, judges included, that humanity is the greatest talent of all. And somewhere in the world, someone would press play again, not to hear a perfect voice, but to remember that kindness, when shared, doesn't fade, it echoes.